Winnershot. None of mine for my number. It's a pad, remember me. So pads in the group. Was give me that really man. These are the performers I know. These are the performers I know. These are the performers I know. These are performers I know. These are the performers I know. These are the performers I know. These are the performers I know. These are performers I know. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. Another fun-filled episode of The Performers I Know is ready to begin. This is episode number 21. That's right, this show is now legal. It could drink and it already could vote and drive, but it can drink now, that's for sure. We're gonna have lots of shots coming up. This week in studio, our very special guest. She is a stand-up comedian. She is an actress, a all-around funny lady. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give her a round of applause. Welcome to the show, Miss Ashley Miller. Ashley, how are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me, Dane.
No problem. Thanks for being here. So, once upon a time, quite some years back, Ashley found her way onto the mental cast, as did a lot of people that I've interviewed um, in that circle, amongst them being Michael Riley, of course, who I interviewed in the very first episode. Um, yes, and we all connected to each other, and it was a lot of fun. But Ashley, my first question to you, as I ask all of my guests on this show, what got you bitten by the performance bug? Because you are not you're not a theater person per se, even though you have done a few virtual shows, but you um, skew more towards wrestling and stand-up comedy and improv. What got you bitten by the performance bug?
Well, in in high school, and mind you, throughout most of my life, I used to do theater shows with a church that I frequented as a youth. And then in high school, I got introduced to Whose Line Is It Anyway? And I think my sophomore year, I joined our high school's theater club. And their whole thing was they did two shows a year. The first show was kind of like a comedy showcase where they either did improv or they did an original sketch show or an original theater play that's all focused on comedy. And then after that, after we got done with the holidays, like Thanksgiving and Christmas, we would focus on a spring play, which was your more, um, I guess, your more recognizable shows like Oliver Twist, Bye Bye Birdie, um, in Oklahoma, things of that nature. Which, for the rest of the time that I was in high school, those were the three shows that I took part in.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few high schools and performing arts schools where they do that similar kind of format. Like the fall show will be the artsy fartsy play, like the importance of being earnest, or just some kind of like old creaky kind of play. And then in the spring is when they do like the big musical. So yes, that all checks out. But I gotta tell you the truth, I'm a little disappointed. Like you were holding out on me. I didn't know that you did theater in high school. I thought you just kind of fell into doing virtual shows with me. So I feel very betrayed right now.
Don't feel betrayed, just feel surprised knowing that you had someone who at least had some inkling of knowing what they were doing.
Yeah, as somebody who knows what the fuck they're doing on stage, which of course we know that you know what you're doing on stage. So yes, it all went from there. The first major production that Ashley did with me was No Name DL, where she got to play Mrs. Claus, and Michael Riley got to play Sandy Claus. And so, Ashley, what was it like playing such a matronly character? Like, you know, the character that's everybody's lovely grandma, or everybody, you know, the person that everybody just goes to for advice.
It was out of all the characters that I've done, it was actually probably the most wholesome, and I loved it. It was a chance for me to do something kind of different because with my history of theater, I would play either goofy parts or like the one serious one-off character or um, kind of like the angry funny lady. But to play someone, which mind you, the play itself was a family friendly, silly show. To play someone like Mrs. Claus, who was the silly but matronly, head of the North Pole was refreshing, and I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Well, I will say that there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I don't really mention about the show, not in a bad way, more like it was kind of embarrassing. So we did a lot of rehearsals for this show, and this is where I learned that doing too many rehearsals can be very exhausting, especially for these young kids that were in the show. The fact that this was not, we were not memorizing these lines, we were literally just reading off of the script as we were recorded. I can understand the kids were just like, Dane, this is like rehearsal number 485. We don't really need to do this. But the funniest thing that happened after a rehearsal one day. Um, Ashley, Mike, and myself were on Skype, just we were BSing with each other after the rehearsal, after we thought all the kids had left, and we were making some kind of a joke, and I just blurted out like, "Oh, I guess I can go fuck myself, huh?" And Nathan, who was playing one of the trolls, pipes up in the chat. He's like, "Dane, we're all still here. You just said a bad word." Oh, uh, oops. I guess I did a bid no word. And a nation of children was traumatized for life. Hmm.
Yeah, it's those checks and balances, man, because they had every right to call you out.
Listen, you know what? Let's call a spade a spade. All of these kids have heard much worse than what I said. And years later, these kids say the same, they have all bunch of potty mouths. So I'm not exactly going on a rosary beat like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I cannot believe I did this.
And
Uh,
heaven forbid if they end up auditioning and getting selected to be cast members on Saturday Night Live, because then they're going to be introduced to the wonderful world of dueling unions, having
that
a proverbial pissing contest between each other and the writers and the cast and Lauren Michaels.
well, Lauren Michaels is leaving after the 50th season, which is next year. So yeah, that's that's a-okay. So yes, No Name the Elf wound up being, even though it was very over rehearsed, it wound up being a very fun show to do. I didn't have to do gosh darn thing except narrated, so that was fun. Um, but we transitioned that into other areas where Ashley is more in her wheelhouse. And amongst that is doing improv. As Ashley said at the top of the show, she was introduced to Whose Line Is It Anyway? So when Mike started up You Can't Be Serious, which is our version of Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's it was a very natural fit. Ashley, what has been your experience like? How did you first get into doing improv? And by that, I don't mean like, yes, we know you were introduced to Whose Line Is It Anyway, but what was the moment that made you go, oh, I want to actually try this rather than watch it?
Well, after I graduated from college, or close to graduation, it was the winter of 2007, and it was my birthday. And when you're kind of like young and you just turned 21, and you tend to go out and explore. And I was living in Fort Wayne at the time. I was just kind of driving around and I heard about this theater called the Firehouse Theater. And from there, it kind of progressed. And, I did theater shows with them. And there was someone who had interest in forming an improv group. His name was Andrew Baltus. And him and a couple of friends, like, I somehow had gotten connected to them through the Firehouse. And we did a couple of shows under the improv group Improvatron 2020. And it was like I think it was like a core group of like 6 or 7 of us. Um, and we did like, I remember our first show that we did it in front of a live audience. And we wanted to do like a gotcha thing. And we came out to the final countdown and did like really bad magic tricks. And then once we were done, we said, "Thank you. We're gonna head off now. Thanks for coming." We leave, and we hear people in the audience just getting louder and angrier, like people yelling, like "What the hell?" and another person yelling, "Free bird!" But then we come back out and introduce the actual show, which is the improv show that we've come to know. And we did like a little bit of long form, a little bit of short form. And I think after that first show, I kind of felt like this is something that I could do on the regular. This is something that would keep me out of trouble and keep me sane. So it's something I did off and on throughout my young adult life.
You know, I have several notes here. This is the director talking. It's like you say it was at the firehouse, and I'm just imagining like, oh hey, so we're gonna do scenes from a hat. Uh-oh, there's a fire. All right, everybody out. Gotta let the fire trucks through. Second,
And at one
second,
point, I don't mean to interrupt, at one point, you would be correct. Uh, in Fort Wayne, there's like a lot of historical buildings that got repurposed. So there was like I mean, if you've seen an old firehouse, they have like the big doors and it kind of looks like a little church. One of them was used for theater, and then it turned into a coffee house, and then it turned into like a small business front. And then one of the other ones was turned into kind of like a museum, like a mini museum in downtown Fort Wayne. So maybe at one point that might have been the case, but yeah, by the time that the Firehouse Theater was active, it was just a theater with a firehouse aesthetic.
gotcha. And the second note that I have is you did terrible card tricks. Like you came out with a deck of cards, like, "Hey, pick a card," and then like somebody picked a card and you just threw them in the air. Like one of those was your card. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think someone did. I know the trick that I did was I made like a circle with my pointer and my thumb, and I was like clinging them together. and then made it look like they were stuck, and then just stuck them out real quick and just stood like, like, are you not entertained? So there
Uh,
was it was a lot of like, piss poor parlor tricks by people wanting to do magic. And it's like, yeah, yeah, nah.
you know, if I was there, I probably would have done like the pull my thumb off thing, like, ooh, how does he do that? That would have been my magic trick. But yeah, well, at least you came back and you actually, did the improv show, or else the firehouse would have been busted. And I don't mean in the Ghostbusters sense.
It just that was the whole thing about Improvatron 2020 is we did jokey cold opens. And I mean, it's like I wish I could have talked to like Andrew more about it, and just kind of like in passing, because I do still talk to him every now and again, but he's kind of busy being like a commentator for a wrestling company in his state. But we would always do different cold openings. And I remember there was one cold opening that we did where we would take center stage and we would just sit down. Like either we would sit down on the stage or in a chair, and everyone else was saying what the person was thinking of. So it was kind of like, you know, we go and we're just somber or we're just kind of like in a calm mood. And I remember sitting there, and mind you, I'd kind of built up a reputation for having a salty tongue and doing hellaciously accurate but horrifying impressions of movie serial killers to comedic effect. And that was all I could hear. And I'm just sitting there, just kind of looking at the audience, relaxing, and I just hear all this stuff. So it was one of the few cold openers that I remember. But that was the thing I liked, is that we did cold openings at different shows just to show, hey, this isn't a one trick pony. We do this and we do it differently, which I thought was really refreshing.
And much, much later on, we actually did You Can't Be Serious live in good old Staten Island. That was meeting a lot of us for the first time in person. What was that experience like? Getting to meet all the various mental cast peeps and doing improv with them in the Isle of Staten.
I would say if it wasn't such, and pardon if you have to censor this out, by all means, um, as much fun as it was to meet everyone and be able to hang out and do some cool stuff every now and again before the show, I kind of thought it was a clusterfuck. Uh, which, don't get me wrong, when you have like a group of 11 or 12 people who either have done improv or are new to it, it got a little chaotic. But it wasn't to say that it was a bad time. It was a good time. And I think the general vibe is we're enjoying this and we're enjoying each other and the audience is enjoying us. So, we're we're just gonna ride this out.
I will honestly say that if I could have done it over again, there are at least four people that I would have not invited to do the show because they just wound up being either A, persona non grata, or just very terrible people that I don't associate with anymore. I probably would have kept the cast to be a lot smaller, but it was still fun. We had a whole bunch of laughs and we had a decent sized crowd, so that always works out super well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing something that you enjoy and you have people to watch you do it, it kind of outweighs the bad. And for me, like for some of those guys, it was probably a new experience for them. But when I walked into Little Victory, it reminded me so much of the firehouse, but I'm just looking at it as like it's different, but it's still the same. And even the dressing room area, because I mean, as much as I hate to say it, because the Firehouse Theater didn't really have a dressing room, but they had a green room, and they had a closet or like a costume room in the attic. It was a legit dressing room. Like it had the whole schmear and autographs from other performers, and it's like, okay, so this is something I'm not quite used to, but I'm used to the theater aspect, and I felt right at home in
Well,
Little
I
Victory,
will
and I
say
would love.
this, amongst the many autographs on that wall in Little Victory Theater, for total posterity, if you look, there is a message that says, Jesus loves you, and so does Dusty Rhodes. Signed, Billy Carter.
Yes. uh
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I've had more than one person look at it and go, does that say Dusty Rhodes like the wrestler? Like, mm-hmm. Oh, oh my. Uh, speaking of speaking of wrestling, one of the other major things that Ashley does and does quite well is she does both professional wrestling as a wrestler and as a manager, and also does a lot of editing, and I believe you do some announcing as well.
at the time of this recording, I've stepped away from the wrestling company that I was working with, but you are correct. um I've worked with three wrestling companies. I've worked with XAWA as a manager, and I managed Deacon Storm from the time that uh, I became more involved to its closing. But mind you, before I started doing the ring announcing, or not ring announcing, but managing, I did a lot of other small time stuff. I was in the audience. I did ref a little bit, and I also took pictures. Uh, and then once XAWA was done, I transitioned over to XCW as a ring announcer because they uh, they wanted an in-ring person to do the ring announcing, because at the time it was JJ, who is the lead commentator. And at the time, I was in a relationship with Mike Riley, and I wanted to kind of be a part of it, but not be a part of any storylines. So I just figured, what if I just ring announce? And they allowed it. And then after a short while with and mind you, I'm comfortable with talking about it now because I don't get bitter about it. Mike and I did end up breaking up, and I wanted to take some time away to kind of get my head straight. And they weren't really too happy about me leaving, but they found another ring announcer to do it. And then when I came back, they had me as on air talent. I ended up in a storyline with uh, Mike, and I ended up wrestling, which in XAWA, I did wrestle as Mint Dragon, but it was temporary. And at some
Mint
point,
Mint Dragon,
yes,
MINT. Oh,
yes, Mint Dragon.
so you
Uh,
were fresh breath. Um, you always came in the clutch if somebody had a breath that was kicking, reeking. So yeah, but it's in a way, acting and wrestling kind of go hand in hand because you're playing a character, um, in the ring as well as on a stage. So I've always had the contention that wrestlers are a lot closer to theater people than you think. Would you say that's the truth, or would you disagree with that?
I believe it 100%. I mean, there's a lot of parallels that could be made between professional wrestlers and theater people. Uh, and I could give hundreds of thousands of examples, but the best way that I could describe it is in wrestling, which I know you know, because this is behind baseball, but it's for maybe the theater folks that listen to this that maybe don't know. Uh, you don't just put two wrestlers against each other and then fight and see what happens. They have to build a rivalry, and they do it using promos where you have a face and a heel, or two heels going against each other, or maybe two faces. And they have to build a story that would justify why these two guys are fighting. And sometimes maybe there's a script, or maybe they do like the Curb Your Enthusiasm approach, where it's like, okay, this is the basis of what we want for this promo. And at some point we need you to kind of get to that. And some people in wrestling are really good at promos. They're really good at getting the audience hyped for the match that is to come, or the storyline that is to come. And there are some who need all of the help in the world. And I think if you have someone who does both theater and wrestling, it tends to help, because you have someone who can kind of say, hey, if you want to convey certain emotions, try saying this or try doing this. Maybe if you're a good guy, don't call the person that you're fighting a motherless prick. So that
No,
that
you probably shouldn't do that now.
well, yeah, I mean, you shouldn't do it regardless, but it helps set that narrative. And it's the best way to connect both of those art forms, because wrestling in itself is an art form, much like theater is. But whereas in theater you have a script, and you have blocking, and you have stage work and costumes, in wrestling you have your promos. You practice all of your wrestling moves. The wrestlers will go over what's called spots, and they'll have a thought out ending. It's like, okay, once this move starts, we need to get to the end. And whereas in a theater show, you have a first act and a second act. In a wrestling match, I wouldn't even say like in a wrestling storyline, because that would take way too long to dive into. In a wrestling match, you have the first act, which is the wrestlers coming out to their theme song and doing a stare down. And then a second act where the wrestlers are doing their moves, doing rest spots, doing submissions. And then you have the final act, which is the last few minutes of a wrestling match, where you're being like, we need to take this home. And then, 1, 2, 3, match over, pinfall, submission, all that.
Indubitably. I see by the old clock on the wall that we are starting to run out of a little bit of time, as fun as all this inside baseball talk has been. My last question for Ashley, as I ask all of my uh, guests, if somebody were to come up to you and say, "Hey, Ashley, I would like to um, start a career in theater or doing stand-up and whatnot," what would be your best piece of advice to give them in order to succeed?
In theater, I would say get involved with a theater group, even if you're not in a position to do any kind of acting, stagehand work, technician, costuming, um, in audition. I mean, audition if you're in that position, because it helps to put yourself out there. And even if you don't make it, there's always something that you can do in the theater that can get you to where you want to go. As far as stand up goes, write, just write what you know, write what your strengths are, find an open mic, and make sure that you follow the rules, but also kind of keep your wits about you. Because most open mic sets are between 3 to 5 minutes long, and you do not want to go over that. But in the same vein, once you've done your set and your time, don't leave. Stay. Watch other comics. Be supportive. Because one thing I've noticed about stand-up comedy is that it can be pretty cutthroat. And it shouldn't be like that, because not all stand-up comedians are the same. You have comics who do insult stuff. You have comics that do impersonations, comics that are regionally strong, comics that do musical work. So write and keep writing and do the open mics and support live comedy, just like live theater. Support live comedy, because without people being there and watching, comedy and theater is going to be fucking dead. Pardon my language, but that's honest to God opinion.
Truer words have never been spoken. Thank you, Ashley. Well, as our outro music comes on and takes us home, I would like to thank my special guest, Ashley Miller. Ashley, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me. I would love to come back in a future episode to talk more about my theater stuff, because I felt it was mostly wrestling. But I'd love to come back and do this sometime if you'll have me.
Oh, yes. Well, we will hit that bridge when we come to it now. But ladies and gentlemen, for now, I am saying have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.